In this video, I will try to explain and demonstrate how active setup works in Windows. It's a feature that allows us to execute commands, scripts, or executables once per user after a successful sign-in to the computer. And I'm starting this video from my GitHub page, and that's because there are a few bits of information here that I will be using for this video. I will leave the URL in the description down below. And here you can see 4 locations for active setup in the registry. 2 of them are in the local machine hive, and the other 2 are in the current user hive. And we mainly care about these 2 right here that are in the local machine hive, and that's because here we will be setting up everything that we want to run for our users, and then the Windows will be managing the keys that are under the current user. And that's because active setup works by comparing the registry keys that are in the local machine with the registry keys that the user has in his current user hive. And now I will explain it in more detail, and I will use this information that I have here as an example, and I will also use this diagram. So let's say that we created a registry key named runcmd with the stub path registry entry with the value cmd.exe. Basically, whatever we have in registry entry stub path will be executed during the logon. And we created the runcmd key in this location right here. It's the active setup registry location that is in the local machine hive. And now let's say a user successfully signs into the computer, because a successful sign into the computer is like a trigger that starts active setup. So active setup starts, and the first thing that active setup does is that it compares active setup registry keys in the local machine hive with the registry keys that the user has in his current user hive. And if all keys exist, then nothing needs to be done and Explorer starts. And this means that the user is able to access his desktop and start working with the computer. And now let's see what happens when the registry key does not exist. Basically, then active setup would run cmd.exe, and this is the value for our stub path registry entry for the key runcmd. And after it runs it, active setup waits for cmd.exe to exit. Basically, it waits for the started process to finish doing whatever it is doing. And this is very important, because if active setup is waiting here, the Explorer doesn't start and the desktop is not loaded. So that means the user is not able to use the computer while active setup is doing whatever it is doing. And that means that we don't want to start processes with active setup that takes a long time to run. And after the CMD window is closed, active setup will create runcmd key in the user hive, and then it will start Explorer, and then the desktop will load and the user will be able to use the computer. And that's it. I'm done explaining. Now I will try to demonstrate how everything works. I know it's a bit confusing right now, but after the demonstrations, I am pretty sure that everything will be more clear. And now I will go to my VMware workstation. I will open up Start menu and I will type regedit to open the registry editor. Now I'll click Run as Administrator and yes. Now we need to find the active setup registry location. For that I will go to the local machine, Software, Microsoft, Active Setup, and Installed Components. And here we have plenty of active setup keys, but we will be creating our own. So I will right click on the installed components, go to New and Key. And here we need to name our key. I will name it runcmd, just like in the GitHub example. I will click here. Now we need to create our stub path entry. So for that I will right click on the key, go to New and String Value. The name needs to be stub path, and then we need to provide the value for this entry, and in this case, just like in the GitHub example, cmd.exe, and OK. And now that we have our stub path with the value, this means that cmd.exe will be executed for each user on their computer during the logon. So to test it, I will close the registry editor, click on Start on the user and sign up. Now we'll sign back in. And now we have this CMD window and the desktop is not loading for us. And this is because active setup is currently waiting for this process to exit. And we will exit this process a bit later by closing the window. Also, this window would appear for each user on the computer once during the logon process. And also it would appear for new users that we would create in the future, until we delete the runcmd registry key. And now let's see how the registry looks, and for that I will type regedit in the CMD window that we have here. Press enter and yes. And here we can see our runcmd registry key that we created in the local machine Hive. But let's look what's going on in the current user Hive. So I will expand current user, go to software, Microsoft, active setup, installed components. And as you can see, we have few installed components here, but we don't have the runcmd key. And that's because, like in my GitHub page example, we see that active setup creates the key after the process is done. So back to the virtual machine, let's close the CMD window. Our desktop is loaded. And if I refresh the registry by going to view and refresh, we can see that the registry key appeared here. And this is how active setup tracks on what users the registry key was executed and on which users it still needs to be executed. So if I close the registry editor now and sign out once more and sign back in, the desktop is instantly loaded and we don't have the CMD window. And now let's try another example, and for that I will go back to my GitHub page where I have few command snippets. And this time I'm using a reget command to create the registry key that's called runcmd commands, and I'm creating this key in the local machine Hive. And also we're creating the stub path registry entry with this value right here. Basically this is a CMD snippet that will execute few commands. It will execute echo that will give us some text output, and then it will execute command who am I. This will tell us under what user the CMD process is running, and then we're executing a pause command. This will pause the CMD window for us so that we can see the output. So I will copy the command, go back to my virtual machine. I will open up CMD, run as administrator, yes, paste in the command, and I will press enter. And now let's look how it looks in the registry, and for that I will type regedit, and it opens the registry editor for us. Currently we are in the current user Hive, so here we only have this runcmd. But let's close this and open up the local machine, software, Microsoft, active setup, and installed components. And here we have another registry key that we created with the CMD command. And here we can see the stub path registry entry. If I click on it, we can see the commands that will be executed during the logon process on all the users on this computer. So once again, it will execute echo, who am I, and pause. So let's close everything and then sign out. Sign back in. And once again, we have a CMD window, but this time we cannot type anything. It only gives us few lines of text. And here we can see the output from the echo command, and here we can see the output from the who am I command. So here we can see that this command line is running under the user admin, and this is the user that is currently trying to log into this computer. And this is great because this means that we can use active setup to execute commands that will modify user profiles on the computer. Or even better, we can use active setup to install software that installs under the user account. Because software like this is a bit annoying when it comes to software deployment. And that's because most of the software deployment tools that we have are using system account to deploy software. This means that software like this is installed under the system account and no user on the computer is able to access or use that software, because each user on that computer needs to have his own copy of that software. And by using active setup, we can install this type of software for each user on the computer during the logon process. The bad thing about installing software using active setup is the thing that we see right now, is that active setup is waiting for the process to finish, and depending on the software it can take few minutes, 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So in my last example I will show you how to combine active setup with RunOnce registry keys to avoid this issue, and we will be installing Brave browser. And a Brave browser is a type of software that installs under the user account. But before that I want to show you one more feature of active setup, and that's how to rerun registry keys that already have been run for the users. And it works by providing our registry keys with a new registry entry named version. Basically, if our registry keys has a version number, we can rerun our commands or executables every time we update our version number. And for that, I will go back to my GitHub page where I have this snippet right here. And this time I'm using a regedt command to update the registry key that we already have. It's the runcmd commands that we created before. And here we're creating another registry entry named version, and we're providing the value here. And the one weird thing about it that the version number needs to be separated by using commas instead of dots. It doesn't work with dots. So I will copy the command that I have here. Go back to my VMware workstation, close this window for our desktop to load. First, let's go back to the registry editor and run as administrator. And we can see our registry key right here. Currently, it only has the stub path. So I will open start, type cmd, and run as administrator, and yes. I will paste in the command, and I think I didn't copy it, so I will try again. And it works now. And I will press enter. So if I refresh the key now, we can see that it has the version number. And this command was run before. It's the cmd window that we saw on the last logon. And if I try to sign out once more and sign back in, and as you can see, we have this window one more time. If I close that cmd, go back to the registry, run as administrator, yes, let's increase it one more time, because this registry key will be executed every time we increase the version number. So if I close the registry editor again, sign out, sign back in, that cmd was launched by active setup one more time. And if I close this window, this time I will sign out without increasing the version number and sign back in. We can see that this time the desktop was loaded instantly. And now let's go back to the GitHub page where we'll be talking about running cmd commands from active setup and RunOnce registry keys. And this is quite important because by combining active setup with RunOnce, we can still execute commands under the user accounts, but the desktop will be loaded much faster. And it works like this. Basically, the user signs into the computer and active setup starts. And this time active setup will be creating RunOnce registry keys for that user. And this is a fast operation, so it will end in a few seconds. And then the Explorer starts and the desktop is loaded for that user. And RunOnce works after the desktop is loaded. So we will be executing commands after the desktop for the user is available. And if you want more details about how run and RunOnce works in Windows, I have a link here to my other video where I am explaining how run and RunOnce works in Windows. So now let's continue. And this time I will be using PowerShell commands to create the registry keys, and that's because it gets a bit messy with the quotes when using the cmd commands. And here I'm creating another registry key named runcmd from RunOnce for the active setup in the local machine Hive. Next, we're creating a registry entry stub path with this value right here, and it's a bit long. But here we're using a regedt command to create another registry entry, this time for RunOnce in the current user Hive, basically for that user who is logging in at that moment. And here we're executing a few commands where once again we're executing echo and who am I and pause, the same thing that we had here when we did this example for the active setup. So I will copy the line and then I will go to my virtual machine. I will open PowerShell, run as administrator, yes, I will paste in the lines and press enter. Now if I go to my registry editor, run as administrator, we can see our registry key that we created right here. And once again, we see that the value is very long. So now I will sign out and let's see how everything works. I will close all the windows, sign out from my admin account. Let's sign back in. And as you can see, my desktop was loaded almost instantly. And once again, we have a CMD window, but this time our desktop is loaded. And that's because this CMD window is executed by RunOnce and not the active setup. And this means that the user is able to use the computer while the commands from RunOnce are running. And now it's time for the last demonstration where I will be installing Brave browser by using active setup with RunOnce. And for that I will go back to my GitHub page, and here I have a download link for Brave browser. That brings us to the Brave browser GitHub page. I will click on the release here, and as you can see we have different kinds of executables here. And give me a second, I'm looking for this one right here, Brave browser standalone silent setup. Basically this executable is a fully silent installation of Brave browser out of the box. We will not need to use any silent switches to install Brave browser with this executable. Now I'll go to my downloads folder and I will copy this executable from my downloads folder to my virtual machine's desktop. And then I will move it from my desktop to the C drive. And once again, go back to the GitHub page. And here I have the command that I will be using. And like in the previous example, I'm using PowerShell to create the registry keys. This time I'm creating a key install Brave from RunOnce for the active setup in the local machine Hive. And then we're creating a properties.f. Once again, we're executing a reg add to create a registry entry in RunOnce in the current user Hive. The registry entry name is install Brave, and here we're executing the commands right here. Basically, we're using echo command to output some text. It will give us installing software, and then we're executing the executable that we have in our C drive. So I will copy this line that I have here, go back to my virtual machine, open start, type PowerShell, run as administrator, and yes. Paste in the command and enter. And if I go to my registry editor, we can see our registry key right here. Once again, it's very long. I will also be deleting all the other keys that I have here because I will be demonstrating the installation of Brave browser not only for this admin user but for one more user on this computer. So I will close the registry editor, close my PowerShell Explorer, and I will sign out. And then sign back in. And now we have this CMD window that is saying installing software. And as you can see, now we have our Brave browser installed. And that CMD window that was saying installing software is not necessary. It's only for this video for us to see what's going on. The Brave browser installation can happen completely silently and without interrupting the user. And now let's create another user on this computer to see if active setup works just fine on other users as it is working for this admin account. So for that, I will open MMC. I will run it as administrator, click yes, then file, add or remove snap-in, and then local users and groups, add, finish, OK. And here we see our local users and groups. I will go to users, right click here, go select new user. I will name him John. I will remove this checkbox right here and I will set password never expires and click create. I will close this window. If we look at John, we can see that he is a member of user groups. So he is not even an administrator. So I will close this window and I will close my MMC console. Now I will sign out from my admin account and then I will sign into the John account. Once again, we see the CMD window that is saying installing software. And the installation is done and we can see that we have our Brave browser desktop icon right here. And this means that active setup works just fine for this new user as it did for the admin account. And this is it for this video. In the future videos, I will show you how to use Active Setup with RunOnce to create different types of software installation packages and how to use Active Setup with a different type of software deployment tools. So like and subscribe if you want to see that, and see you in the next one.